Welcome everyone. You're in the right lecture today. We are very honored to have Nia Easley here to talk about her book, The Last Green Book. So I'll introduce her in a few seconds, but just before we do that, we want to acknowledge that this morning Black Chicago lost one of our, a legend and an advocate and an activist, Dr. Reverend Jesse Jackson. And the BMRC will try to produce something more meaningful, acknowledging his presence, his work, and also the fact that records about him are found throughout a lot of our members' archives. And so we do join the rest of the city in mourning the loss of Reverend Jesse Jackson this morning. I know personally his run for president when I was a child was very significant. It meant something to think that you could be president. I know now another generation has seen a Black president, but before we saw that, it meant a lot to even conceive of the fact that a Black man could be president of the United States. Okay. For people who are not familiar with the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, we welcome you to this talk and we welcome you to the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. Our mission is to cultivate and steward a network of all who seek to document, share, understand, and preserve Black Chicago experiences. We do that through a network of currently 29 members. You can see our current members on this screen. From small, what we call community archives, to larger university archives and special collections. We try to make sure that we can locate, access, and actually use and learn from the collections that are related to the history of Black people, meaning African American and other African diaspora communities. It is Black History Month. For us, it's always every month is Black History Month, but a way to celebrate February, we acknowledge, the work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson in making Negro History Week, which then became Black History Month. But we believe that some part of celebrating could also be donating to a Black History-based organization. So if you like, there's one dear and true to my heart, the Black Metropolis Research Consortium. We'd appreciate your donation, but even if it's not us, then think of other organizations out there who are doing this work, especially in these times, and celebrate by supporting them. Today, Nia Easley will speak to us about the Green Book. The Green Book, which began in 1936, although apparently, maybe some archivists here can correct me, people have not actually, a copy of the 1936 edition it seems not as prevalent as the others. But in 1936, the author of the Green Book wrote that with the introduction of this travel guide, it has been in 1936, it has been our idea to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties, embarrassments, and to make his trips more enjoyable. Now, obviously, this is an understatement as to what Black motorists could go through in America in the 30s. To say difficulties and embarrassments, they were actually, threats to life. We'll learn from Nia how the place of the book in history and its effect on Black America. And just in case you're interested in any other kind of materials about Black travel, just to know that some of our other BMRC members do have other publications that were made to support Black motorists and to help them as they navigated traveling across country. Our member, the Newberry Library, for instance, has a travel guide of Negro hotels and guest houses that was produced maybe in the 1940s, and then the Guide to Pleasant Motoring that started in the 1950s and went into the 1960s. So there's a lot within BMRC's member collections also related to Black travel and safety. But right now I will hand it over to Nia Easley. Nia Easley is a Chicago-based artist, designer, researcher, and educator. Her practice incorporates a broad range of material engagement to confront and record contemporary American life's absurdity, violence, and beauty, rooted in our shared histories. Her artist books are in the Joan Flashed Artist Book Collection at DePaul University, Northwestern University, the University of Chicago, the University of Iowa Special Collections, and the Graphic Arts Collection at Princeton. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Nia Easley.
So much, Samaya. Thank you, Gabrielle, for your assistance today. And good morning. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Um, in researching the Green Book, sorry, there is a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So I'm going to do my best to get through our slides and we'll leave a little time at the end for Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat as they arise. Um, in researching the Green Book, I have so many people to thank. I'm standing on the shoulders of many scholars who really worked hard to shed light on this story, um, including Candace E. Taylor, who is quoted in one of Samaya's slides there, Victoria Martinez, who's done a lot of research into Alma Green, who was a big part in the production of this, even though she doesn't get recognized much, Gretchen Soren, Isabel Wilkerson, and Daniel Quiles, an art historian who teaches at the School of the Art Institute, where I was a grad student when I started this project. Um, I'm not a historian. I am an artist. And another part of this book, I want to thank Sonnenzimmer, who are Nick Butcher and Nadine Nakanishi for supporting the production of this book, April Sheridan at the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection, and finally, I want to acknowledge the photographer I worked with, Maria Dunevsky. So the seeds of this project, I can start putting up some slides here. Um, so the seeds of this project began in 2015 for me. I was in this class, History of Migration, taught by Daniel Quiles at the School of the Art Institute, and I had been reading Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, an epic retelling of the Great Migration. For those of you who haven't read it, you should. It's great. Um, I was intrigued by her description of a quote, kind of underground railroad for colored travelers, spread by word of mouth among friends and in fold up maps and green paperback guidebooks that listed colored lodgings by state or by city. That line hooked me, and I began researching to discover what this green paperback guide was. I had never heard about it. Um, at around the same time, the New York Public Library put all of their copies of the Green Book online in high def scans. So that was my access to resource this guide because, as Sumaya knows, and maybe many of you who've searched for it here in Chicago, we don't really have copies of the Green Book available to research. Here are a couple of the copies, and on the cover of every guide, it would say, "Keep your green book with you. You may need it." Right? The the founder, Victor Green, and his wife, Alma, were no stranger to traveling back and forth between North and South. Alma was from Virginia, I believe, and had family back there, and so knew the difficulties they could encounter. Victor Green had been born in the North, in New Jersey, and they lived together in New York. Um, but still, we know that in the what are considered like the northern states, still people experienced discrimination through Jim Crow laws. And the Green Book staff saw themselves as activists and tied their work for Black motorists to the work of institutions such as the Urban League, the NAACP, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The Green Book's progressive character was able to sustain itself for over 30 years, and its tagline for almost the entire time was carry your Green Book with you, you may need it. This is Victor and Alma. And just, by way of example, this is a postcard from Greenville, Texas, and you can see the banner as you drive into the town, the blackest land, the whitest people. This was a sundown town where you were not able to stay. So there were multiple purposes of the guide. It was not just a handy reference for vacation destinations. On this cover from the 1949 edition, we see this quote from Mark Twain at the bottom underneath their regular tagline. It says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice." And that is a quote from 1869, Mark Twain wrote in The Innocents Abroad, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime, right? He's still using this gendered language, but I think we can give him the benefit of recognizing that bigotry and prejudice is a detriment to the country, and he's encouraging people to travel. However, I believe that Victor and Alma are putting this quote on the cover here in sort of a reverse, right? Um, it is the Black traveler who is sort of they're not losing their prejudice by traveling, they're combating prejudice through travel. And then um, just a little bit more of the Green Book history. So here we see the 1951 edition and sort of its role, right? So this aspirational guide is in 1951 promoting railroad travel, and yet we can still see in all of the images. So in this article on the image to your right, all of the all of the Black people that we see in the photographs in the guide itself are working on the train, right? So there is this gap between the aspirations of the guide and the world that it's dreaming, along with all of its readers and the people who patronize the guide and contribute to the guide, and then like the world that we're actually existing in. The guide was stopped. They stopped publishing it in the 60s. Victor had passed away. Alma had taken over as the head of the magazine, but we can see in the 1964 edition here that they had stopped using that tagline on the cover. So the passage of the 20th century's civil rights laws was seen as kind of an end to the need for the guide, even though we all know maybe that's not entirely accurate. Um, but again, that um, optimism, right, that was carried in here. And on the right, I'm highlighting this page inside of this edition that was telling people all of the rights that were being passed, that were being granted to people through the passage of those laws, right? So for Illinois, it says anti-Jim Crow law and recreational facilities, including discriminatory advertising. Violators subject to civil damages, criminal punishment, and injunction. And they clarify that means court proceedings. And so they did that for every state and the District of Columbia. And this brings us to the 1962 edition. This is the guide that I was referencing for my Green Book project. The 1962 edition was the last edition published before the passage of the beginning of the passage and the passage of the um, sorry, of these rights laws, right, across the different states. So I was referencing this one because the places that were listed are absolutely like not being compelled legally to not discriminate. They are just not discriminating. And also, this is the first guide that Alma was the head editor of. So you can see this is my project, The Last Green Book, and the front cover says The Last Green Book, and you open it up once. That first turn has a reproduction of the bottom half of this 1962 edition. Um, and then you open it again, and this is a reproduction of the 2 pages that were listed for Chicago. Another thing I'll point out is that They solicited suggestions from people around the country, right? And the guide was republished every April. So in April, they would send out a new guide. I'm guessing to be right ahead of vacation season. Um, but one thing we can see is that there was no ad space sold for any Chicago places. So, um, just a side note, like these are not all of the places, obviously, that Black travelers could go in Chicago, right? Um, but it got you in the general direction of where you would find the action. And for Chicago, we see in this edition restaurants, supper clubs, beauty shops, hotels, what they call tourist homes, kind of similar to like Airbnb these days, right? Lounges, clubs, salons. Yeah, the YMCA. Up at the top here, that second one, Ahmad Jamal's Alhambra Supper Club. I'll just start there. This is a spread from Ebony Magazine, outlining the new Alhambra Supper Club designed by Ahmad Jamal. And it was at 1321 South Michigan Avenue. The bottom right image there is of the Alhambra courtyard in Granada, Spain, that it is modeled after. Um, Jamal himself had gone on this tour of the world and returned, and made this uh, a place where they didn't sell alcohol, right? Because he had converted to Islam. And he also played shows there nightly. The image on the top left is of him and his band recording the album live at the Alhambra. This is what that address looked like when I was doing this project. It was a non-functioning dry cleaners underneath a large apartment building. Um, so one thing that I found when I started visiting all of the locations listed in the Green Book were these um, areas of loss. So empty lots, parking lots, businesses that were not operating, and we'll just look at a number of those. And I started documenting them. So another listing from that edition of the Green Book is Wedgwood Towers. Wedgwood Towers, we can see in the postcard on the right, was a beautiful building. It was co-owned by star Olympian Jesse Owens and had residents like Joe Louis and Minnie Mignoso. Now it is a parking lot, as we see on the left. Another thing that happened while I was doing this research is I was visiting the DuSable Museum down there in Hyde Park, and I came across this exhibition that I must have walked through a million times, but it was highlighting World War I and World War II Black soldiers. And in there, I saw these postcards, and I'd never really noticed them before, and they're postcards of the devastation from war. And then just by chance, I was trying to think of what I would do with this information, these images that I was seeing following the Green Book, and the idea clicked. I would make a postcard book of the, our devastation. So two more of the postcards on display at the DuSable. This is the lot on the right is the site where the Royal Canton Cafe used to be, listed in the Green Book at 354 East 43rd Street. And that's just across the street from the Forum, which is now being revitalized. I hope to see more things there in the future. But again, just to point out, like the Forum is not in the Green Book, but if you were to end up at the Royal Canton Cafe, you'd be right next to Chicago's best dance floor. And I'm just going to go through a couple of images of other spaces, empty lots. I would drive up to these addresses, and even if there were other buildings and houses around, a lot of times it was these empty lots. So this is back at the Wedgwood Towers. This was the CNC Club and Lounge. We can see that this laundromat is also not in business, even though there is a building there. And so this is one of the rare exceptions listed as the Velmar Hotel. It is now condos that sits at 2120 West Washington Street. Also not in the area that of not in Bronzeville, so not on the south side. This was one of the west side locations, and also not in an area that has continued to be depressed by the ongoing legacy of Jim Crow redlining and just general um, lack of resources given to the Black community in Chicago, right? Another example, it's not an empty lot, but it is a park that used to house businesses. At 66th and King Drive, Robert's Show Lounge is listed in the Green Book. And now that houses the New Beginnings Church as well as an alternative high school. Um, this strip is interesting. You can see at the bottom right, that bit of King Drive is known as Honorary Herman Roberts Way. He was a prolific businessman who many people still talk about today. When I was down there walking around, taking pictures, someone came out of the church and then I told them what we were doing, and then they talked to me about Herman Roberts for 20 minutes because he owned businesses up and down the whole block, hotels. Um, He relocated to Chicago from Oklahoma during the Great Migration. Robert's Show Club, so there's an image of it on the left there, was built in a garage that once held his cabs. He was a cab driver and then also owned the cab company and had several cabs at a time when white cab drivers wouldn't service this outside. And then his Southside Club, known as Robert's Show Lounge, featured stars such as Sammy Davis Jr., Nina Simone, Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, and Jackie Wilson. He also brought in comedians, right? Some of the best of the time. This is from his obituary written by Maureen O'Donnell in the Chicago Sun-Times. This is another one of the locations listed in the Green Book. So we can see there's just a real loss and record of disinvestment over time. This is the parking lot over at Lake Meadows. And I don't have an image of Stelzer's Lounge, but we do have this flyer from the Chicago Defender, 1957, inviting us to come see the sensational Tommy Jones and his Rhythm Kings in a friendly, relaxing atmosphere at Stelzer's Restaurant and Lounge. This is Mollison Elementary at 4415 South King Drive, listed as Poro College Tourist Home at 4415 South Parkway, as King Drive used to be known. We can see on the marquee there, it says, "Welcome back, scholars. We love you." I'm so glad that I was there to take this picture on the day that that marquee said that. I think it's brilliant. And just a little bit about Poro. Annie Malone was a pioneer in the women's beauty and hair care industry. She started out in St. Louis and then relocated her business to Chicago. And um, she was very successful. She employed a lot of people, and she had a whole campus on the South Side, part of which sat on she had the whole block where Mollison was, so also where the Chicago Defender is, right? And also like Blanc Gallery is there right now. But on the right, we see this ad for Poro designed by Charles Dawson, who was a Chicago-based artist, designer. He made advertisements for many significant things in the Black community, and he attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. The library at the Art Institute actually holds his autobiography that was typewritten, never officially published. But if you're interested in learning more about him, you can find it there. Another lot in Hyde Park from a business that was listed in the Green Book. The French Poodle, as it was listed in the Green Book, at 1001 North Clark. If you go there today, this is what you see, this kind of nothing really going on, tacked on attachment to this building. And in my research, came across this post talking about the French Poodle, and the jazz pianist Stu Katz commented that it was a tiny bar situated at the northwest corner of Clark and Oak Streets in Chicago that featured excellent live jazz on a tiny stage behind the bar. One of its most frequent featured performers was the late great multi-instrumentalist Ira Sullivan. I was privileged to have worked there myself as a pianist with Ira Sullivan, as well as with other horn players on multiple occasions beginning in the mid 1950s. The owner was a tough Italian named Chuck, who definitely knew good jazz music from bad. Okay, so that's like an interesting um, characterization, and that's all I could really find about the place. Um, this is the former site of the Kitty Cat Club on East 63rd Street underneath the Green Line. And so, sorry, before moving on to the information from that next slide, what this all tells me is it as an artist, I am trying to situate this guide in the present moment. And as we follow this map through history and it brings us to these spaces, I feel like a real loss of the possibility of what those places had been, and as what it represented for the potential and growth of this migratory population, um, long after the travelers have come and gone, and the people who live here in Chicago have lost this great cultural wealth. Um, so the possibilities are still there, but they've been affected by the hard lessons of this last century. And so, in trying to keep the legacy of the Green Book alive, I've made this artist book, and then also um, have been starting to do activations in different ways. So, um, 2 years ago now, as part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial with the Southside Community Arts Center, I gave a tour in the 2 block radius around the Art Center, where we looked at this on the right is a pamphlet I made for that tour that shows the Hotel Brookmont, which is now a park. Um, and then images of a performer, and then also this baseball legend who worked at the Hotel Brookmont. This is a postcard of the Brookmont. And also on that tour, we hit the historic YMCA on South Wabash. This is where Carter G. Woodson was living when he came up with Negro History Week, which became Black History Month. Thank you, Carter G. Woodson. And so that was like one way of activating this history, talking to people, thinking through what's been captured and what's been lost, what the guide did, where it led people, and where we are now. Another way that I've activated this history is through working with students at Mollison Elementary. So Mollison is sitting where the Poro College Tourist Home was. And I was able to connect with some faculty there and work with fourth and fifth graders along with my co-teacher, AJ McLennan. And one of the things we did with the students through introducing them to the Green Book was talk about what did they want to see in the neighborhood? Where would they like to be able to walk to? And we ended up with a series of drawings from those students. I believe this was the White House. And then, of course, we see just like regular businesses, Sky Zone, places kids would like to go. Three little girls drew Sephora, Museum of Ice Cream, swimming pool, and then this like sweet imaginative sky house drawing. Um, and those drawings culminated in this group. Um, we transferred them to Fabric and made a series of group banners for them that they used in another later performance in the courtyard, playing music. We were also talking about music because clubs and music were such a big part of the Green Book and where people would travel and what was listed for Chicago anyway. So, um, those are all of my slides. I would also say that this book is featured at the San Francisco Center for the book, and right now in a show about 250 years of artists printing. And there's also an article coming out in LA Plus, the Interdisciplinary Journal of Landscape Architecture, about this project. Um, yes, maybe we can, Sumaya, open it for questions and have a little bit more time to talk.
So thank you so much, Nia. This was great. I actually had a chance to look at the your last green book, look at the postcards and pull them out of the places. If people have questions, this is a great time to put them into the chat and or raise your hand, and we'll, feel free to ask a question verbally to Nia. I have a few questions, so maybe while we're letting everyone kind of warm up. So I wanted to know, there are lists, so obviously the Green Book over years listed a lot of Chicago locations, and even the last Green Book lists a lot of locations, but you only picked a few for the postcards that are in the book, and I wanted to know, what was that process? What made you pick certain places to photograph? I mean, there are a lot of empty lots, so what made you pick one empty lot over next, or a park, as you were making the book?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very practical consideration. So I received a small publishing grant to make the artist book, and actually photographed all of the locations. So all 55 locations from the 1962 edition, I did visit and document. However, when it came time to printing, there are things like printing costs that I was considering, the size of the book itself, fitting 55 postcards into a slipcase versus 10, and like what the utility and transportability of all of that is. And so that's why I selected those 10. And then or that's why I selected that number. But why those 10, that came down to sort of scope of where in the city was represented. So I do include one of the downtown locations, not the 1001 Clark one that we looked at in this slideshow, but another location that was known as the Birdhouse. Um, and also just the images themselves, how pretty I thought they were, right? So there's also like an aesthetic thing that comes into play. And I don't think I mentioned this, but postcards for me kind of kept this rooted in the idea of travel and in a way tourism as well. And then if you have them, you can send them out and also spread the word in a way that to me ties to the mission of sort of collective knowledge that the Greens were participating in.
Thank you so much. There's some questions in the chat. First, there's a comment by Whitney Wade that about there was a parade in the honor, and I think she's uh, hosted by Annie Malone Children. I think she went to the Miss Polo, the woman who started the polo. Um,
Yeah, that's
uh,
great. Thank
and
you.
then Michelle Washington is saying, "Thank you for the great talk. Where's your Green Book pamphlet available?" And then someone else related to that, did you say there was a copy of your Green Book artist book here in Chicago? And if so, where, if available to view by the public?
Yes. So there are copies available through the University of Chicago Library at the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection, which is open to the public by appointment at the School of the Art Institute. Um, I um I think maybe if I can put an email or something in the chat, I have like two copies available left of the 180 print run. But yeah, you can certainly see it in those two locations.
Yes, I saw it here at the University of Chicago's Special Collections. To me, I tell you, it's very um, emotional to pull those cards out and just to see, what was lost. And I think it's very poignant when you actually see the name of the building that used to be there. We have some people from Special Collections here on the call on this call, so thank you very much. Um, so Amy Mooney, BMRC board member and faculty at Columbia College Chicago, as asking, thank you, saying first of all, thank you for an amazing overview of your project. Do you know if the Greens ever hired African American photographers?
That's an excellent question. I don't know what their hiring policy for photographers was. I would imagine yes, but I actually don't know. And for more information about the Green Book, like the history of it, I would turn to Gretchen Sorin. Again, that's Sorin. She has a wonderful book called Driving While Black, African American Travel and the Road to Civil Rights. Victoria Martinez and Candace Taylor, a photographer who has documented many of the sites across the entire country. Um, yeah.
I do have a comment,
Sure, go
Nia.
ahead. Hmm.
Hi, yes.
So I do know that Candace owns every edition of the Green Book, and I do know that the company that printed the Green Book, they were Jewish
Okay.
because no one would print the book at all because of the specific time period and the content. I don't know what they did for the book in Chicago, but I know traditionally, since he was a postman,
Yes.
um, that I think either he took the pictures or he had individual people take the pictures that were Black.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's actually, I checked out Overground Railroad about this to prep for this, and Candace's in the book says that they were not able to locate a 1936 edition. So I don't know if maybe if they found one since the book came out about 6 years ago. But yeah, that's an interesting quest as well to find the original 36. Although I think there's one on the New York Public Library. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
visual.
there is on the New York Public
That's
Library,
interesting because in the book, but yeah, that's
which is
interesting.
interesting.
That she says
But
that in the
that
book. Hmm.
Sorry, Samaya, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
That
no, go
first
ahead.
edition is only New York. It doesn't cover any other
Mm-hmm.
states.
Yeah, I noticed it. Yeah, it's only New York
Yeah,
locations. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. There's some other questions in the. So Kimberly Black, also a board member, Chicago State University faculty, says, "I'm so wonderful presentation. I'm so grateful that you're involved educating the children. It's a marvelous way to teach our history." No, I'm sorry. That's Win Hill says that. Before that, Kimberly Black says, "Were you surprised about what remains versus what structures are no longer present?"
So, in order to answer that question, I grew up in Bronzeville, a block away from Mollison Elementary. I grew up walking through these neighborhoods in the 80s and 90s. Um, and I write about this for LA Plus, experiencing these spaces as a child as just having a lot of green space, right? It almost felt luxurious in a way, when you would go downtown and like there's just buildings and concrete everywhere, right? Um, so I wasn't surprised to find that in a lot of the spaces because I already knew that. I knew it from my lived experience. What was shocking was experiencing the sort of delayed grief and loss at recognizing what had been there before for many of those spaces. And then, in the case of, for example, the French poodle, and um, where it was on a block downtown where there were thriving businesses. It's probably got to be one of the highest rents in the city. And for something to still not be there, was a shock. And then I would say the second sort of big shock was to follow the guide and come time after time after time again to an empty lot, even though I knew the empty lots proliferated in this area, for that to be what this guide was telling me. Sort of jokingly and anecdotally, we almost started calling it the curse of the Green Book, right? If you're listed in it, now it's an empty lot. Of course, that's not true. It's not caused by the fact that they're in the Green Book, but by this greater story of disinvestment and um, economic violence, really, towards Black communities. And we see this all over the country.
Yeah, thank you, Nia. The next question from Kaylin. Once again, thank you for your presentation. I wonder how we can move through this grief with so many lost places, particularly with jazz and music spaces. How do we honor and also celebrate some of these rich spaces, particularly in a performance context? And then Winhill says they were thinking similarly, imagining programming to share this legacy with others.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. And I think that's what myself and many others are trying to do. It's uh, uh, like trying to use our imaginations and creativity to not only draw attention to these spaces. I mean, I think that's really what the historians excel at, is like digging up the factual parts of this history. And then what myself and others are trying to do is like connect to this emotionally and then see how we, in this present moment, can like revitalize the energy and the momentum of what had been happening then. So for example, I have the slide that shows the forum. And Samaya, maybe you can talk a little bit about the project that you all have coming up there. But right across the street is that empty lot from the Royal Canton Cafe. And I think it would be great if, while programs are happening at the forum, we can also point to that lot and say, hey, this is part of Black history too. Even though there's no longer a building here, who knows what will happen. And then also at Mollison Elementary, going in and talking to the students about what the Green Book was. Of course, 9, 10-year-olds have something of a harder time conceiving of the relevance of something happening 60 years ago. So getting them to listen to some of the music that was played, we listened to some of Madman Jones's bebop, and they were actually into it, which was amazing. And then having them draw and connect haptically and visually to what they're hearing gives them an access point to this history. And so I think it's through activities like that. And, you know, what else? There's a million ideas we can come up with. So,
Well, since you mentioned it, Nia, so in the forums, some of our people associated with the BMRC know this, but the BMRC has, in a few weeks, will be renting a space temporarily at the bottom of the old forum, which was a building built in the 1890s and became a real central spot for Bronzeville, for Black culture. We'll be using it to have our BMRC 20th anniversary activities, including an exhibition that will open up soon. And I can just let people know, I'll put this in the chat. Our next book talk will actually take place at the Forum Cafe in March, kind of as a prelude to our exhibition opening and to other activities we'll have in the space. So if you want to get a sense of what it's like to go and re-inhabit those spaces, I think we could say a movement of people who are trying to kind of revitalize the spaces and remember the spaces that Black Chicago lost for gathering. And so, yes, I invite everyone to our talk at the Forum Cafe. The RSVP is right there. We haven't really advertised it yet, but since Nia mentioned it, this is a way for us to go and re-inhabit those spaces and to remember. Yeah. There are a few more questions, Nia, in the chat. I don't know if you see them. Amy
I,
Mooney, did you see them?
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead
Yeah,
if you've
I
read
did
them.
happen to, I did just open the chat and thanks, Maya. I didn't mean to jump the gun on announcing your
No,
partnership
no,
with
no, no.
it.
It's happy. It's just. I think I was planning to announce it today, but with the passing of Reverend Jackson, and just thought
Yeah.
yeah, turn it, yeah.
So I see Win Hill. Would you happen to know if Chicago had one of the longest listings among locations featured? And actually, yes, no, Chicago did not have one of the longest listings. And that was one of the things that led me on another bit of research that we haven't really talked about today. But I think because of our location in the Midwest, because there were other travel guides, and because if you followed the listings in the Green Book, it would get you roughly to where you needed to be, and then you could just talk to people and find other places to go because of the concentration caused through redlining and discriminatory practices, that they just didn't feel a need to put as much about Chicago in the Green Book. That's my sort of working theory about why the list is not as long as it could be. And just very briefly, I noticed that, especially at the height of jazz, right? We probably had 75 at least jazz clubs around the city. And in the guide, there's like 10. And so I started to look for places outside of the Green Book at one point, and that led me down this long side path to looking at an early post-Civil War Black community on the northwest side of Chicago in Avondale. But that's a whole other story. Um, Amy says, have you looked at earlier versions of Black business directories from the 1920s, such as Sims or Black's books? They functioned in a similar way with listings in cities and states with lots of advertisements. I think I've seen a copy of Sims, yes, but I haven't spent too much time really delving into that. I think because I had this experience of reading The Warmth of Other Suns, and I got really into learning about the Green Book, that directed my research for a long period of time. But yes, I would love to spend some more time with those guides as well. Um, am I missing?
I think also Amy mentioned just collaborating possibly with Kate Dumbleton, who's at about maybe the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, like to collaborate on some of the activations you're trying to do about the Green Book.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any? Are there any more questions from, I mean, there's a whole other conversation just about, how safe it is to travel today.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
what would the guidance look like today? I guess, there's a lot of
Yeah.
things on
Yeah. Shemaya,
social media.
that's
Yeah.
excellent
Yeah.
point as well. When I first started this research in 2015, 16, I had come up with a uh just a I hadn't started the guide, but was like thinking through what would it look like today, and would it pose a greater danger to actually list these places where people could be found? And at the time, this was at the beginning of the first Trump administration, and I was thinking about it also in terms of immigrants, right? Which is so timely now we're here where we're at and they're being hunted openly in the street. Um, and so I'd kind of proposed this idea that maybe the guide wouldn't be such a good idea in the way that it existed then,
Mm,
because you'd be giving them a list of
mm,
places to go to
mhm,
round
mhm,
people up,
mm,
right? I've seen there is a version of a contemporary green book that just lists Black-owned businesses. And so that is a version of trying to continue this mission. As we know, for every dollar spent in the Black community, more of it stays than leaves. I forget what the exact percentage is, maybe 75 cents or something like that. But um, yeah.
okay. Thank you so much, Nia. There's some comments from Emily Treptow about maybe connecting what you found through the Green Book with the Folder Map Project by Tanika Johnson. Or if you're familiar with that, just kind of what locations might be the same spaces, and other ideas for other work. They're trying to give you more projects to work on.
I appreciate it. I really do. I
Yes.
love getting all these ideas from the public who would be using and seeing these. I do know Tanika. I do know that project. I think it's brilliant. Maybe there is a way to combine these two in the way that we talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nia. And I think we'll end it here if there aren't any final questions. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to have literally stumbled upon the last Green Book and to really be able to have the opportunity to see it in person. And it is very emotional, and it does speak to a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of economic development and civil rights. But thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. The recording will be available in a week or so on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you.